Now, here's Hank Hanegraaff.
Thank you, Randy. As I was saying before the break, you and I are to be salt and light, and as such to uphold the building blocks of civil society, something that I wrote about in my book, Truth Matters, Life Matters More. You think about the building block of marriage. It was once correctly believed to be the unique and the permanent, the comprehensive union of body, mind, emotion, soul, a proper end of which is children. Today, the lives of children have become expendable. All we need to do is think of New York's Reproductive Health Act. This effectively permits abortion up until the very moment of delivery. And not only that, but the U.S. Supreme Court's redefinition of marriage has not only undermined the foundation of human civilization, it has opened Pandora's grizzly box. If there's no special virtue in gender-differentiated parenting, is there any magic in the number 2? And why arbitrarily assign 18 as some magical age of consent? My point here is that once we abandon the biblical definition of marriage, there is virtually no limit on where our unsanctified passions will ultimately lead us. Western governments were mandated by God to ennoble life, to promote justice, to restrain sin, but instead they are leading the charge towards social chaos, even towards the eradication of gender distinctions which were ordained by God from the very inception of human civilization. And yet, while I talk about government, the most colossal failures belong to the church itself.
Are Christians guilty of blind faith? Read Hank Hanegraaff's book, Has God Spoken? Click on the eye above.
We're not only losing our kids, but our evangelism efforts aren't keeping up with the pace of population growth. We're no longer teaching our kids, and we're no longer evangelizing the world. In this regard, I always think of Jacob Neusner, who reminds us that civilization hangs suspended from generation to generation by the gossamer strand of memory. Said Neusner, if only one cohort of mothers and fathers fails to convey to its children what it has learned from its parents, then the great chain of learning and wisdom snaps. If the guardians of human knowledge stumble only one time, in their fall collapses the whole edifice of knowledge and understanding. And he wasn't alone. Rabbi Jonathan Henry Sachs underscored the criticality of constant conversations between the generations. He said, "You achieve immortality not by building pyramids or statues, but by engraving your values on the hearts of your children and they on theirs, so that our ancestors live on in us and we in our children, and so on until the end of time." And this admonition is reminiscent of what Moses said. Moses exhorted the people of the promise to impress the words of the Almighty upon the hearts of their children and their children's children. He instructed us to talk about them when we sit at home, when we walk with our children along the road, when we lie down, when we get up, to tie them as symbols on our hands and to bind them on our foreheads. to write them on the door frames of our houses and upon our gates. Why? Because Moses exhorted us to never forget the commands, the precepts of God. If truth matters, and it most certainly does, the church has to take seriously the task of Christian education. Not edutain, but educate. Equip our children and their children to always be ready to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have. Or as the Apostle Paul put it, let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt. You're the salt of the earth, so that you may know how to answer everyone. Let me just state the obvious. There are myriad professors, there are lots of cultural pundits who are ready to steal away the faith of your progeny. Ready to tell them, as does Dr. Alex Rosenberg, who is a professor of philosophy at the prestigious Duke Center for Philosophy of Biology, that physical and biological science makes the existence of God less probable than the existence of Santa Claus. The church as a whole has been notably slow not only to meet the challenge, but even to recognize the challenge. In other words, we failed to be salt and light, as Jesus said we should be. Salt, it's a preservative. And light, well, light dispels darkness. The darkness of ignorance and blindness and foolishness and imprudence. We are to be a light to the world, just as the first disciples were a light to the world. What Christians do for the least of these is a light that shines forth throughout the world. Look, for example, at what Tristan Osbay is doing. I just did a podcast with him. He's the state secretary for the aid of persecuted Christians and what's called the Hungary Helps Program. And as state secretary of Hungary, he has been commissioned to finding ways to connect the ancient persecution of Christians to what Christians are enduring today. Now, Hungary has its roots in Christianity. And therefore, as Christian in culture and belief, stands in solidarity with Christians who are suffering throughout the world for their faith. And it's no small matter that 80% of people who face persecution today are Christian. That's 4 out of 5 persecuted people are Christian, which gives credence to the prophetic utterance of Jesus, who said that if they persecuted me, they will also persecute you.
Listen to the most interesting, informative, and inspirational people on the planet. The Hank Unplugged podcast. Click on the eye above.
So righteousness shines out and catches the attention of the world. What Hungary is doing is being watched by the world. And what they're doing draws myriads to the uncreated light of Christ. You are the salt of the earth, said Jesus. You are the light of the world. And therefore you are to let your light so shine before men that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father who is in heaven. As I go through the Sermon on the Mount and I try to expand upon the words of Jesus, or at least to to give some context for these words in our contemporary culture, I have to confess once again that the words of Christ are so magnificent that sometimes rather than expand upon them, we need to simply memorize them, to take them and make them part of the warp and woof of who we are. You, dear Christian, are the light of the world, but you're also salt, and we must never lose our saltiness. Otherwise, the culture will corrode and eventually collapse. Thanks for tuning in to this special edition of the Bible Instrument broadcast as we work our way through Matthew's Gospel. When we come back next time, we're going to talk about what Jesus said. I came not to destroy the law and the prophets. I came to fulfill them.